Hello, everyone. Chapter 10 overview in this video. This chapter covers global stratification. And at first you might think, well, why do I need to know about global stratification? In the previous chapter, we've already studied stratification in the United States. Well, the answer is that we need to know what happens in other countries, not just in terms of economics, which is primarily what global stratification is focused on, but we need to know what's happening in other countries politically, as I said, economically, because what happens in one country does affect very often the rest of us. If you've been paying any attention to what's been going on in the banking world, particularly with regional banks. In the last couple of weeks, you know that 3 regional banks have failed. One, First Republic, didn't fail, but it has been struggling, even though it's received an influx of $30 billion from several other larger banks. So the answer to the question, why should we study global stratification, is very simply that what happens in one country or groups of other countries can affect the United States as well. So, what are you going to learn in this chapter? Well, you're going to learn the difference between global inequality and global stratification. Global inequality is really focused on the pockets of where wealth and resources are concentrated within groups of certain people. And then global stratification, which is focused on the unequal distribution of wealth and resources among nations. So, for example, I'm sure you all know that the United States is considered to be a wealthy nation, as are most European countries. Not all, but most. On the other hand, I'm sure you all know that most countries in Africa are considered to be poor countries, countries that are less developed than the westernized countries. And so we will see stratification, global stratification, when we look at all of the countries in the world and we try to understand how are wealth and resources distributed in these countries in this area versus countries in another area. You'll also learn about poverty, different types of poverty, feminization of poverty, and of course the consequences of poverty. What happens to people who live in poverty? What are their life outcomes when living in poverty? And of course, you'll learn a couple of theories, modernization theory and dependency theory, 2 different explanations for why we see global stratification. Modernization theory is the idea that the reason why some countries are less developed than others is because they lack the money, the resources to tap into whatever resources they have available in that country. So the fix then would be that other countries would lend them the money, and then they would just be able to get up and running and be able to mine whatever resources in their country or manufacture whatever gadgets or widgets they can create. That's a pretty simplistic view, I think you will find. There are critics of this idea, and you judge for yourself. The other theory is dependency theory. And dependency theory is this idea that less developed countries become dependent on wealthier countries to give them aid and other economic aid and other resources. However, the flip side of that is that wealthy countries want these countries to do better because they want them to have an infrastructure of sorts. But the wealthy countries perhaps may not want these less developed countries to become quite as effective and efficient at doing what they do, because then they may be able to start to compete with the wealthier countries. So all in all, I think a fascinating chapter. I hope that you enjoy learning about how global stratification affects all of us. And I forgot to mention, there's one part in the book that discusses manufacturing, and in particular, all the things that we use on a daily basis. In fact, I challenge you to find something in your closet, whether it's shoes or clothing, that was actually made in the US. I don't think I have any myself. Why? Because everything is manufactured in other countries, because it's cheaper to do so, and then it is sent back to the US. And so how does that affect those workers? Again, global inequality, global stratification. I'll see you next time.